Let's dive right into this explainer, because we're covering what is, without a doubt, the most terrifying, relentless, and ultimately triumphant story of human survival in recorded history. We're looking at the 1914 Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, a journey that pushed the absolute limits of human endurance. 522 days. Just let that sink in for a second. Imagine being trapped in the deadliest, most unforgiving environment on Earth for 522 excruciating days. When you're out there in that frozen wasteland, the sheer length of time you're stranded quickly becomes your absolute worst enemy, just entirely wearing down your body and your mind.
Part 1. The Impossible Antarctic Dream.
So in November 1914, the legendary explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton set out with a crew of 28 men to do something nobody in history had ever done: cross the entire Antarctic continent on foot. It was honestly an almost arrogant ambition. They were planning a 2,900-kilometer march through blinding blizzards and minus 50 degrees Celsius cold. And remember, they were doing this without any of our modern safety nets. No GPS, no smartphones, no radio to call for help. It was literally just man against the elements.
Which brings us to Part 2, Trapped by the Ice.
Well, nature had a completely different plan. Before Shackleton and his crew even touched land to begin their trek, the freezing waters of the Weddell Sea clamped down around their ship, the Endurance. By January 1915, they were completely immobilized by millions of tons of dense sea ice. And as the Antarctic winter fell, the situation went from bad to straight-up horrifying. The men were plunged into months of absolute, unrelenting darkness, 24 hours a day, pitch black. And worse, they had to sit in that dark, freezing ship listening to the terrifying, gunshot-like sounds of 15-foot thick ice groaning, shifting, and slowly crushing their wooden hull.
Eventually, the pressure was simply too much. By October 1915, the ice ripped the ship's stern apart, freezing water poured in, forcing Shackleton to order the entire crew to abandon ship and step out onto the frozen, floating ocean. Crew member Tom McLeod pretty much perfectly voiced the grim realization they were all feeling at that moment. I don't think we'll ever return home. What they were left with was basically a recipe for pure hopelessness. They were now sleeping on floating blocks of ice with practically nothing: 3 small lifeboats, about 1 month of rations, and exactly 0 radios. Literally, no one in the outside world even knew if they were alive.
Part 3, Adrift on Frozen Oceans.
Stripped of their ship, this grand expedition transformed instantly into a primal psychological war for survival. They were entirely adrift, floating at the mercy of the ocean currents. Shackleton had to adapt fast, shifting his leadership style to focus purely on mental fortitude. He instituted a strict 2-pound weight limit per man. And to lead by example, Shackleton actually abandoned his own heavy gold coins right there in the snow, proving that life was their only valuable possession. He assigned daily routine tasks just to keep the men busy and stave off depression, while secretly diluting their strict food rations to make them stretch.
But this daily struggle quickly built into a cascading nightmare. Over the months, they drifted blindly as the summer temperatures caused their ice floes to shrink. One night, their iceberg literally split in half, plunging a crew member straight into the freezing water. They managed to pull him out, but it was a constant waking terror. Their water ran out, leaving them with tongues so swollen from dehydration that they had to, and this is brutal, suck the blood from raw seal meat just to be able to swallow.
497 days. It took a staggering 497 days from the time they were trapped before their boots finally touched solid ground again. They landed their small lifeboats on Elephant Island, completely exhausted but alive.
Part 4. The Drake Passage Crossing.
The thing is, Elephant Island was essentially a death sentence. It was barren, completely uninhabited, far from any shipping lanes, with absolutely zero rescue in sight. So to save his man, Shackleton evaluated 3 impossible escape routes. He could try for Cape Horn or the Falklands, which were closer, but he ultimately chose the furthest target, South Georgia Island, a brutal 1,300 kilometers away. Why? Because the prevailing winds and ocean currents gave them just a marginal sliver of hope to actually reach it.
To get there, Shackleton and 5 of his toughest men took one of the tiny, battered rowboats and rowed straight into the Drake Passage. And history tells us exactly why that was considered pure suicide.
It is the deadliest ocean route on Earth, known for 12-meter-high rogue waves. Historically, over 20,000 sailors have lost their lives here, leaving 800 sunken ships scattered on the seafloor. Yet, in a tiny rowboat, they went right in.
Part 5. Conquering South Georgia Island.
For weeks, they battled the ocean, just getting pounded by waves, freezing and vomiting from seasickness. Miraculously, after surviving a massive hurricane just 3 miles from shore, they landed on South Georgia. But their luck was completely twisted. They landed on the wrong side of the massive island. To reach the whaling station on the other side, Shackleton and 2 men had to engineer a way over unexplored 10,000-foot frozen mountains, a feat no human had ever achieved. They rested in a cave for 9 days, eating bird meat, tied themselves together with a single rope, and then climbed blindly over the terrifying peaks, marching non-stop for 36 grueling hours without sleep.
When they finally stumbled down into the Stromness whaling station, they looked like literal ghosts from the ice. With black faces, matted hair, and rotting clothes, the station manager couldn't even recognize them. He could not believe that these terrifying figures were the very same men who had vanished into Antarctica 2 years prior.
Part 6. The Final Rescue Miracle.
So Shackleton was safe. He'd done the impossible, but the ticking clock was deafening. There were still 22 men slowly freezing and starving to death back on the desolate shores of Elephant Island. Living under an upside-down boat for shelter, second-in-command Frank Wild kept the crew's fragile sanity alive. Every single morning, facing starvation and despair, he would repeat this unwavering mantra to his men. "Pack your gear, boys, the boss might come today."
And the boss really was trying. Shackleton spent 4 agonizing months failing 3 separate rescue missions, constantly blocked by the dense sea ice that nearly trapped his rescue ships again. Finally, on his 4th attempt, a Chilean ship named the Yelcho pierced the ice on August 30th, 1916, reaching the shores of Elephant Island.
When Shackleton arrived, he counted the men on the shore. 28 men had walked into the icy, unforgiving jaws of Antarctica nearly 2 years earlier. And against all historical, physical, and scientific odds, exactly 28 men walked out alive. Not a single member of the crew was lost.
So, what's the real takeaway from this explainer? It isn't just about avoiding the ice or planning better logistics. It's about how structured mental strength, mental fortitude, is the absolute ultimate tool for human survival. It was discipline, routine, and a flat-out refusal to give up hope that saved those men when the entire world had written them off.
To bring this all full circle, 106 years later, investigators finally located the sunken Endurance, sitting 10,000 feet beneath the Weddell Sea, beautifully preserved by the freezing waters. It stands there as a silent monument to what humans can endure. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. If a wooden ship can survive perfectly preserved at the bottom of the darkest ocean for over a century, what impossible storms are you capable of enduring?